Hello, it's Scott Manley here with part 84 of Interstellar Quest. We have Sean Locke and Billy Bobka Skirman on the Highlander on their way to Minmus. Now, this is of course your standard injection maneuver. We're just heading out towards the target, firing up the engine, accelerating to transfer velocity, and then hopefully once we get there we'll be able to land and start acquiring science from the moon. We want to do the same that we did for the moon to Minmus. We want to get all the science from every biome because we are starting to run out of biomes to take science from and still get to warp drive, which is going to need a whopping 10,000 science, and that's of course not including the science needed to upgrade it to the next generation, the more complex field theory. Anyway, these guys are going up there just to make sure that we do the best with everything in our backyard. However, this episode is not going to be concerned with the Highlander. No, it's going to be concerned with this aircraft. This is the VTOL you saw a couple of episodes, the one which I successfully ditched after a catastrophic structural failure. I've decided to christen this Juan Sanjas Villalobos Ramirez. Yes, it's another Sean Connery themed name. But yeah, I've fixed a number of the flaws with this, and well, this is the first real attempt to actually fly it into space. Now, actually it's not the first attempt to fly it into space, it's the third attempt because it kept on crashing. Not the aircraft, the game kept crashing. Something about flying a horrifically complicated vehicle into the air just seemed to make the game give up from time to time. But like its namesake, it gets more than one chance to attempt to do things right. So yeah, the way this works is we use the nuclear engines to accelerate it up into the air, then we switch on the Sabre engine, which will help us shoot up to orbital velocity. What happens is we originally used the fusion engines on air breathing mode, then we switch those over to rocket mode and turn on the Sabre so that it using air breathing mode, and then finally, once we're going fast enough, we can turn off that Sabre and then just cruise into orbit using the fusion-powered thermal engines. And then further up, we can even start to shut those down. Once we're practically in orbit at this point, and of course I want to turn the engines off and use the plasma engines, and of course I mess up with my action groups and fire up my vertical engines. Note that those vertical engines caused a bit of rotation. I will have to be doing some balancing. Anyway, I want to use the plasma engines to get into orbit. We're going to burn a little bit of that xenon. And, well, there's a problem with that because these things are slightly off-center. I mean, they're very much off-center. There really wasn't a place to put them, but one of the consequences of that is that whenever I fire the engines at any reasonable thrust, it makes the whole aircraft pitch nose down. There you can see the transition as I get switched into something of an orbit, although it's not really in orbit just yet. We will still return to the planet. We can deploy the radiators, and soon, well, the xenon is burning down, but we can continue to accelerate at a whole, well, there's about 7 kilonewtons between them, but we have plenty of time to get up there. Now you see, this is an example of something that looked good on the drawing board in theory. I figured that we would be able to fire the engines even if they were slightly off axis and then rely on the reaction wheels to keep the nose up. But as you can see, I can't run these at full throttle using the xenon fuel. The xenon fuel gives us extra high thrust, and I thought that would be useful for maneuvers where we wanted extra efficiency, but we wanted to do it quickly. So the xenon fuel, kind of pointless. I shouldn't have brought it along. It was just adding mass when I could use something else. And indeed, when it burned out, I was intending to use monopropellant. Now, monopropellant, of course, also gives higher thrust than liquid fuel thrusters. But even then, even with the monopropellant, I can't really get it above about 1/3 thrust. And I spent a lot of time just holding the pitch up key the whole time because I was trying to keep this thing accelerating straight. Now, given that this was essentially an experimental flight, and I was finding out about this vehicle, I did consider alternatives. You see, because we're thrusting like that in a position, well, because of the way we're thrusting, we're continually pitching downwards. Now, there's a way to make the thing not pitch in the same direction always, and the way you do that, of course, is you adjust what down is by rotating the whole aircraft. Spin stabilization of aircraft with crew on board. I'm not sure anybody's tried it, but I was prepared to give it a go in the name of science. Jebediah seemed to be quite enjoying it, but I'm not sure that it was necessarily Bill's cup of tea. And as it turned out, it wasn't particularly successful because you had to kind of micromanage the roll. You see me pausing it and trying to get a good, nice roll started again. You see, because it starts to deviate and you have to manually control the deviation. So trying it again, and again, I had to kind of sit and micromanage this whole thing to make it work. And that is not a recipe for me being not driven insane by doing this whole thing. So anyway, in low Kerbal orbit, it is decided to pretty much abandon the plasma drives and leave them perhaps as an emergency mechanism for getting back if we run out of fuel, because we really don't have the fuel constraints 100% locked down for this, because we're going to have to switch engine type so much. And as it turns out, those plasma thrusters generate a specific impulse of something like 2800 with the monopropellant. The fusion-driven thermal engines, they are actually generating a higher specific impulse. If you can just about see it there as it flicks by. So I would have probably been just as efficient if I'd got rid of those plasma engines, got rid of the xenon, got rid of most of the monopropellant. We still need the monoprop to run the RCS. Anyway, we're going to perform the transfer using these fusion engines, and that'll help us get there a little faster. Now, we kind of do want to burn off some of that monopropellant if possible. So what I did was I switched on these engines once again, and it seemed to be working pretty well, adding an extra 20 kilonewtons of thrust, until I realized that that was sucking power from my fusion power plant, and so I switched back to regular engines and forgot about that. Now, if I want to change this design to remove the monopropellant, it's kind of hard because the parts are deep inside the structure, so it's hard to take the whole thing apart. Now, with the new B9, of course, you can just right-click on those tanks and say, make these monopropellant tanks instead, or make these regular fuel tanks instead of monopropellant. See, as it happens, this VTOL is, well, it's one of the most complicated things I've done, basically. VTOLs are very hard to do because to get them all balanced and get the engines right, get them looking good, especially when you're looking at Ferrum Aerospace as well in the equation. You know, having your lift engines sitting underneath the wings is great until aerodynamic drag tears them off. And indeed, in the real world, building vertical takeoff vehicles, it is an exercise in compromises, right? So you can see here that I'm running the plasma engines and the regular engines at 50% thrust, and that way 50% of the power is going to heating the exhaust gases and 50% is going to running the plasma thrusters. That at least lets me get rid of some of my monoprops, so I'll be slightly lighter. I could just dump it, but if I can use it, that will help me. So yeah, VTOL design is pretty much an exercise in compromise. If you want it to be able to land vertically, typically it doesn't travel forwards very well. Helicopters are a great example. Their lift-to-drag ratio is about 4 to 5, whereas the lift-to-drag ratio of a commercial airliner is typically 15 to 20. If you have a highly efficient glider, it will get as high as 40. So helicopters tend to burn a lot more fuel to go the same distance compared to other vehicles that land on runways. Indeed, speaking of burning fuel, you'll notice that I've put this into a highly elliptical orbit because we're going to make a plane change. And of course, if we put ourselves into a really tight orbit, the plane change would take more fuel. And I'm not about to waste fuel because it's just not in my blood or something. It's not in my nature to waste fuel. I like to do things efficiently. Although, really, I don't need to worry too much given how fuel efficient these fusion engines are. Yeah, I should really have done a lot of this stuff on paper rather than just mucking around with what looked cool. Very nice view there from the cockpit of the Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. Excellent view of Kerbal and the moon in the same frame. Oh wait, the map is telling you it's called VTOL Evac 1. No, don't trust it. It's Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. And by luck, it looks as if the Outland is in fact going to be roughly the right location for us to pick it up. You see there, to the left of that orbit. So we're going to come down over the top and then we're going to try and pretty much set it down. I did not plan this. This was just a very good timing, very good luck, really, more than anything. So we're going to skim the edge of that crater, and of course I begin my descent. So the descent is going to be done with the fusion drive as much as possible. But at some point we're going to have to switch over to the vertical engines, and those are not yet tested, as I'm sure you know. So yeah, we're using both the plasma engine and the main engines. Again, with the intention of burning off as much monopropellant as possible, because the monopropellant is actually giving us lower specific impulse than those main engines. So we should be trying to burn the fuels with the lowest specific impulse first if you want to get the most efficient rocket. That's why you'll find that rockets use hydrogen in their upper stages, but sometimes they'll use kerosene in their lower stages. So yeah, this approach took a really, really long time because the engines do not accelerate at a great rate. Early on, we're accelerating using both the plasma and the fusion engines running at about 50% thrust. But that actually provides barely more than 1 Munar gravity of acceleration. Now later on you'll see that I'm now at 100% thrust because I've stopped using the monopropellant engines. I still have RCS running because, hey, I want to burn off some of that mass, and to be honest, if I can use it, great. Drop the velocity down to a couple of 100 meters per second. Technically we can land this on its tail using those engines, but we want to use these vertical engines. And so it's back to old me as I actually test things. Okay, thrust limiters are set to 0 in this front one. Let's see what happens. And yeah, we're pitching upwards. So let's turn off both the front 2 of these. There's 2 engines, so we've arranged these in groups so I can shut off the thrust, and we'll see how much torque we get when we fire them. That looks a little better, but actually I think that's good. I think we are good to go. Now there are mods that will do all that balancing for you, as I understand. Makes it a lot easier to build VTOLs, because what you'll find is that as you're burning fuel, the center of mass is moving, and that way you're going to get a torque that you have to offset unless you're very careful. So yeah, I've obviously reduced my velocity a whole lot, and I'm pretty much letting gravity pull me down. So I'm just going to make sure that I get close enough to the surface before I actually switch into vertical landing mode. We're going to use those main engines for as long as we can. We're going to get close to the surface using these because they have a very high specific impulse. As soon as we switch over to those vertical engines, we are going to be running on a much more thirsty fuel system, which means that we will have to do things quickly. Anyway, I figured that since this is the first time I'd tried this, it's over to old me. Well, that's enough faffing around with those nuclear thermal turbojet thingies. Okay, we have all our engines. Point them downwards. We have power. And now, can this actually hold me against the gravity of the moon? And I would say yes, because my velocity is decreasing, but I'm pitching down, so let's put some more thrust into these front ones. Maybe 20%? I don't honestly know. I'm totally guessing this. How's that? It looks a little more stable. We're still getting a lot of pitch, but the RCS is keeping things under control. Great! And now it is time for us to alight gently onto the surface of the moon. Just a little more there. Alight gently onto the surface of the moon with all the deft swagger of an elite swordsman. One perhaps named Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. Okay, so the only problem with this is that the nav ball isn't very helpful when you're going straight down. I do hope that the enhanced nav ball that we get in the next KSP 0.25, I hope that is going to make these kind of situations easier. I have a horizontal speed of 3 meters per second and it is growing, so I'm trying to figure out which way to go. Vertical speed is dropping and I'm burning fuel. I have about 4 minutes to land. I have to land this in 4 minutes before I run out of fuel. If I run out of fuel, I'm going to be in trouble because I need to get up to orbital velocity and escape before that happens. Okay, dropping the thrust because my vertical speed needs to be going down faster. At this rate, I will take a minute. And that will be too long. Well, actually, no, it won't be too long. But all the same... Okay, so horizontal speed is going backwards, so if I fire those engines, it will push me forwards. Aha, you see, look at that. I'm just going to use those while they're there, but I also have RCS thrusters. I am not going to try and get anywhere near to the target just yet. Yeah, we're slipping sideways, I think. Vertical speed 10 meters per second going down. Throttle up just a bit to make sure. 5, 7. Okay. And we're going sideways a bit. Fire those RCS. Come on. And I think I'm pitched down, so I'm not sure. Seems to me that there's a bit of like phantom thrust going on here. Okay. Definitely going down sideways. Just come on, hold on. 800 millimeters per second, 700. We're going less than 1 meter per second, and we should be within about 20 seconds of touching down. 10 seconds even of touching down. Throttle up. Come on. Come on, don't brake. 3 meters per second. I want to make sure the vertical speed isn't too high. And I see a shadow. Ooh, touchdown! Touchdown on the moon! From this day forward, every schoolchild will know the name Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. Now, I'm about half a kilometer away, but this is B9 landing gear, so I can go in and I can turn on the steering, turn on the motors, and I need to put steering on the rear wheels because it does like to sit on those rear wheels, especially since I've burned all the fuel. It's kind of... I need to do a bit of work on this design. But otherwise, yeah, I can totally drive this thing like a car, like a rover on the surface. It looks a little strange with those radiators pointing up. It's not so much roving across the surface as it is sailing upon the Munar surface. And putting the pedal to the metal, so to speak, gets us up to about 4.7, 4.8 meters per second. Which is about 15 kilometers per hour or about 10 miles per hour. It doesn't so much drive across the surface as it, well, lumbers. Not really designed for driving, but then again, it does save fuel. And we do get a decent view out of the front. Look, we can see this, and there it is. It's just over this hill. Just wait, and... Oh my god, there's a rock there! Turn! Let's not... Turn! Emergency turn to avoid the rock. Yes, obviously, I'm just pretending, because the rock wouldn't have hit us, and that was obviously all recorded well after that particular disaster happened, because it really happened in quite slow motion. It wasn't nearly as exciting. Anyway, I'm sure the crew of the Outland are happy to see the Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, and of course Rusty Kerman takes a quick flight over there with all the science he can carry. and jumps to the side and gets told that he can't take the science with him. So instead he goes to check the cockpit and misses. Try again and get into the cockpit. There we go, just a light on the tip there. Clean the window and ditch the science. Well, not so much ditch as confined to safekeeping, because that is the only part of the aircraft that has parachutes after the last disaster. Ah, look at him there, staring back with the galaxy reflected in his visor, ready to take a trip home to Kerbal, which will be in the next episode. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.